It would be hard for me to review Outer Wilds. I've rewritten this intro so many times, but that statement always felt important. When talking about, well, anything we love, it can be really tough to resist the temptation to use grandiose statements of hyperbole. Things like, "This changed my life," or "It's not a game, it's an experience." It doesn't really matter how earnest those statements may be, they don't really mean anything to those who don't share that emotional connection, often coming across as simply pretentious. It's especially common for pieces of media which are ripe for others to consume, and you feel you owe it to not only them but the creators who gave you that incredible experience to pressure them into buying it. In the case of Outer Wilds, you can find an endless number of anecdotes, many in video essays just like this one, about how this quirky little indie game has deeply emotionally affected them, how it's drastically shifted their viewpoint on the universe, how if you even have a chance to get a fraction of what they got out of Outer Wilds, that you should buy it without hesitation. No one really seems to have an answer when you ask them why. I mean, most of the game is just reading text, most of the NPCs are pretty static and lifeless, and the world it's set in is ridiculous and estranged. I'm certainly guilty of having the first assumption that the person talking as such is simply more emotionally suggestive, or has external experiences in life that cause an emotional response beyond what the game actually offers. Thing is, I'm not an emotional person, really. I'm quite stoic by nature, and I'm not really the space junkie I was when I was a kid anymore, and I'm not overly existential because of my beliefs, and I don't talk about this kind of stuff, ever. So, understand that when I say I've spent more nights than I could count, sitting in bed, staring up at the ceiling, just thinking about Outer Wilds and having my throat well up and tears run down my face in a way they never have before. That it probably sounds as saccharine and sappy to me as it does to you. But that's why I'm writing all this, because it's been years at this point, and I can't say a day of mine goes by without thinking about Outer Wilds. I really need to figure out why. So this video isn't a review, but the only way I could really describe it is as an honest, scrambled attempt to reconcile with a game that kind of unlocked me emotionally. I didn't like Outer Wilds at first. Admitting that now feels so strange after everything, but I didn't. I thought it looked kinda silly and amateurish and dull, and not at all like the trailer I thought I had seen 4 weeks earlier. Especially off the back of unabashed praise, the game can be quite unassuming at first. Figuring out why that's the case starts with one tiny detail that most won't even realize, but is emblematic of what it's like to play this game, which is waking up at that campfire with 4 eyes instead of 2. I was surrounded by peers who stressed friendship and history I had no knowledge on. I had to find my way around a home I'd never lived in, and everyone was insistent that I was totally ready to go into space with all the training I hadn't had. Even the act of jumping was disgustingly awkward. As a result, the beginning of the game felt like less of a tutorial and more of an exhaustive effort to cohere myself and my character in as quick a manner as possible. I got to know the villagers through menial conversations, the elders and children that made each of these nostalgic wooden cabins a home. I gained skill through the act of routine activities and indirect simulations. A museum taught me the history of Timber Hearth and all its ventures that occurred before me. I was introduced to this charming little space program with no requirement of years of study and training, no precautionary protocols to precede my departure. My spaceship was a rickety amalgamate of duct tape, wood, and stolen technology, littered with all the niceties of home. My journey into the cosmos wasn't predicated on extravagant investment of time and money from thousands of individuals, but the work of a group of friends with an innate passion for the unknown. I may have only been on this planet for what was less than an hour, but by the time I reached that launch pad, I had the knowledge of everything I would know from a life on that planet, and everyone I had to lose when I saw it all engulfed in flames. Other space games have definitely more accurately depicted the unfathomable vastness of space and the immensity of the challenge to traverse it, but Outer Wilds caters a very different kind of accuracy. Every planet I would visit had impossible topography and size, with gravity that pulled me like puppet strings. All of the phenomena that would usually only lend itself to the most scrutinous forms of study were instead macroscopic and tangibly interactive. My ship had more resources and supplies than it could ever need, and any damage it took would be repaired in mere seconds. This is the version of space I dreamt of as a kid. At first it all seemed ludicrous, straining credulity at best, but I came to believe in it due to the game's own belief in truth and systems. Its stubborn adherence to its own rules proved quite frustrating initially, but in its consistency and its earnest foundations in existing scientific theory and practice, the world it presents is tangible and seamless despite the realism it lacks. I still learned to fear the vacuum of space, gawk at the scale at what's around me, marvel at how much is out there, but at a scale that's so much more intimate than what can be achieved by a flawed mimicry of reality. Spaceflight is initially quite clunky by necessity because every input on the controller is and is only a direct correlation to the ones my character makes in their world. There's literally a joystick on the jetpack. As a player, I had to learn that momentum is only ever relative, that gravity is an ever-present force, that orbital mechanics are fickle balance, that no matter how capable I felt, I was nothing compared to the powers of this celestial dance. It was often difficult and disheartening, but upon its mastery, I felt genuinely as capable as the character I play as was. There are few games with as much going on as Outer Wilds that I can say that about. Almost all of the user interface is made strictly diegetic too, from painful flashes of burns and blunt trauma to markers and waypoints to even something as simple yet alienating as opening 4 eyes instead of 2. When I think back about Outer Wilds, when I see rolling sheets of starlight and vistas of planets through memory, I remember it as if I were there, a tiny speck trying to make sense of something infinitely grander than myself. This mechanical harmony between player and character extends to the narrative too. I could never dictate or decide any elements of the story, but it's inherently personalized by the order of which I discovered clues and the nature in which I connected them. Given it was my only way to progress, I scoured the details of discourse and dwelling for meaning that would aid me, deeply embedding them to memory far more than I would in passive media. The vast array of interconnected parts visualized by the cluttered computer interface feels so insurmountably complicated at first that a genuine sense of pride develops from its comprehension. So, during that tunnel-visioned effort to find progress, whenever I would suddenly realize that the text I was reading was a mournful love note to a mate lost to tragedy, or that the ruins around me were littered with the bodies of infants at play, when there was emotional meaning to the walls and words I trivialized as information, it really hit me. It was a revelation I would make alone in the quiet halls of long-dead homes. Most ancient civilizations in video games are characterized as impersonal, enlightened, more defined by the ruins they left behind than the individuals that once lived in them. As I began to learn of the Nomai, they first came across as this perfected reflection of humanity. Curious, conscious, creative in all the ways we are, but collectively kind, mindful, and united in all the ways we aren't. I laughed at the awful puns they made, shared their inquisition towards mysteries, marveled at what they'd accomplished. But as time went on, I started to find the cracks in that facade of pleasantry. I found clashes in ideology, I found complacency and hubris, I found paralysis and doubt. I followed as obsession consumed them, warped into worship, isolating those with a crisis of faith, eventually bringing them to potentially sacrifice themselves and everything they had come to call a home. I shared every silence of grief, every tender discourse, every failure. The Nomai were always dead. They've been dead for hundreds of thousands of years. And yet, when I reached the comet and read those last frantic cries, to me they died then. And I was left alone to grieve. Because not only did I know, down to excruciating detail, every person, every promise, every prospect, every preparation that was cut painfully short, but I also knew exactly what that felt like. So I went to fix it, with the kind of unbreakable resolve common in playing video games. A large beginning portion of my time playing was spent lackadaisically roaming around the solar system with no fear of death or consequence. I had an infinite amount of time and an infinite amount of tries to solve an admittedly big problem, a supernova. Because there was a solution, right? There was so much to discover, so many contraptions to understand, so much to suggest that I'd eventually find that switch to flick to solve everything. Then I met Chert. They shared a report on an increase in supernova, and before even processing it, I took my signalscope out and, for the first time, stopped to watch the stars. Instead of the calm, glistening landscape I was expecting, I was greeted by a wild, all-encompassing fireworks display as stars were endlessly snuffed out, and my heart sunk as the full ramifications of that reality fell upon me. Not my character, or their world, or the story, but me. Suddenly, this solution I was searching for seemed far out of reach. This problem expanded infinitely in scope, and suddenly an infinite amount of time didn't seem like enough. I ended that loop there, sitting with a friend, watching the stars die out. My only hope that remained was the sun station, the last scapegoat, the last switch I had for all my problems and fears, the last place that could fix everything. After the gauntlet of a journey I had to take to get there, reading that it was useless for its purpose broke my heart as much as it had the Nomai. The universe was dying, and there was nothing I could do about it. I've never felt so small. After finally making my way into the Ash Twin Project and my ultimate path to the Eye hit me like a truck, I didn't feel like I'd found the game's solution to a puzzle, but the culmination of decades of research and effort, and every risk, fear, and mystery of that plan fell upon me. The Eye was no longer a solution, a switch. It was an escape. One that entailed me leaving my home, my planet, my solar system, my universe, everything, to die. I can tell you I've put myself in a fair few dangerous positions throughout my life, but Never have I felt the fear of death greater than when clutching the warp core in my hand, with every muscle in my body tensed and my heart beating 1,000 times per minute at the end of the universe. When I reached the eye and saw amidst the vacuum of space this unknowable mass that everything had led to, that saw societies crumble amidst their search, that I had bled every kind of blood I had to lose to reach, I could not discern between my character's breathing and my own. When I made that fateful jump, I felt no elation, just fear. And I felt like a coward, and I felt like a child. And I had long since forgotten that this was a video game. All this means that when I reminisce about Outer Wilds, no single event or moment comes to mind. My playthrough is so distant now, embellished over time and diluted by watching others. But every time I hear that little strum on the banjo, I'm hit by a wave of every memory I have from playing this game. Memories of the big stuff, of course, the supernova that know my graves, the ending. But more potently, I find the small stuff. Sitting at a campfire with a friend, staring at planets and stars flying across the sky above me, wandering caves and glades in silence, floating across open space whilst listening to nothing but my depleting oxygen supply. Every character's struggle, every lonely skeleton I found, every abandoned building, every moment of wonder, excitement, fear, terror, confusion, hopelessness, solace, sadness, I just remember it all, and I know that no matter what I do, I will never get them back, and I can't help but just lose it. Completely. In a way I never have before. And cry. I lost Outer Wilds, and I live with that every day. When those final stars died out, it was the end of that universe to me, as much as it was for my character. That no matter how much I wanted to hold on, I had to let go. I haven't really been the same since, learning to not just find solace in sadness, but seek it. Beyond games or movies too, but parts of my life, all the people, places, and memories I've had to leave behind. Not just that they're now gone, but the beauty they had when they weren't. All these years after listening to the music, watching dozens of playthroughs, spending a whole year animating a tribute, all to grasp at what it was like to play this game for the first time again. And now, coming back to play the DLC, having my jaw dropped, having chills run down my spine, having that spark when you put all the pieces together, that's all great. But just being able to share my story and everything I've learned with someone else. And I don't want it to end. I'd have Mobius making DLCs until I die. I can't say goodbye to Outer Wilds. But it seems we have reached the end of our journey, and I'll really miss making music around a campfire. But I'm glad I got to stop and smell the pine trees along the way. I'll take with me everything I learned, even if the rules are about to change. Because the future is built on the past, always. And I can only hope there's as many wonders and perils and mysteries in what comes next. So thank you, Mobius, Thank you for making me curious, for making me cry. We don't have much connection, but still, this was all so special. And I hope you won't mind if I think of you as friends. Now, when I look up at night, at the unfathomable vastness of space and my place in it, I'll hear a faint tune, and all the stars and planets in the sky will seem that little bit closer.